Hey, Brandon,
Hey, Alan.
and welcome to Dice Over Everything, the Miniatures Gaming Podcast, episode 101. We're past 100.
Oh, wow. Okay. I don't know. I don't feel like I've been sitting in this chair for that long, but...
Oh, we didn't
I
do it
guess...
in one day. I think it's been like 3 years. We started in 2018. Oh my God, that's longer.
It doesn't feel like Groundhog Day to you every time you sit down? Okay.
Literally the 2 years in between that time and now for COVID, I just don't remember them. So it's only been 3 years since 2018 in my head, even though it's actually been 5 years. It's crazy.
Anyhow, on the note of things that have come back, I guess sports have come back. And I don't know, when you hear people like talking about sports and about like super nerdy stat stuff, like, I don't know, I find it just reminds me of people talking about miniature gaming, like esoterica, like, oh, this guy's been getting this many scores and this, or he's super good at like this type of
This
play.
many
I'm like,
scores, I like that.
this level of nerdiness sounds very familiar to me.
Yes, except that you don't understand it because it's something brand new to you.
Yeah, and they're just going so deep into it that you're like, okay, this is the level of jargon involved in talking about sports at the level that they're into it. You're just like, this makes absolutely no sense to me. So, but I don't know. Everybody can kind of like understand sports on the most superficial level. Like when you're watching it, you can kind of like get a feeling for what's going well or what's not going well.
Not necessarily.
No? Okay.
Well, I guess if you look at the scorecard, where they're, but you don't imagine looking at American football and being like, oh, they scored. Wait, how come they got 3 points? Oh, 7 points? What? What's like? How do you even know what's going on? Oh wow, they looked so far ahead. It's 3-0. Oh well, what happened? Now they're losing 6-3, right?
Okay. Well, I guess you could give someone a 2-minute explanation of like how the sport's played, and then when they're watching, they kind of have
American football. No way. A lot of different games.
Getting closer to
you know what the rules of cricket are?
Heck no, I don't even know if getting to the other end is sending the ball into the net. They don't even have a net.
They don't have a net.
Exactly. Like, what are you doing to get the ball to the other end? I don't know. Just get the ball to the other end. That's the sport.
It's not really. I don't understand cricket really either. You're apparently supposed to knock down wickets or something, and then you need to hit the ball and run back and forth to get points before all your batters have gone through or all the wickets have been knocked down. And then you switch and the other person does it. But there's also a whole bunch of different ways to play it. There's like short matches and long matches, and I can't tell you. Okay. Also, this is like, that's kind of like reading Wikipedia to figure it out, cricket. I have never actually watched a game of it played more than just like a couple of clips. So I actually don't know what I'm talking about. But go on.
Okay, well, that reminds me of some like war games. We're like, okay, you could probably just like read the rules of this and maybe be able to play the game. And other games, you're like, no, there's no way you can read the rules and show up and be like, oh yeah, I know what I'm doing. The rule books that go on for hundreds of pages have like books for every faction, all that. Like if you just read it and show up, you've got no hope. But there's some games out there that are really fun that you can read the rules and start playing, and you can pretty much make your way through without feeling totally incompetent.
And I guess in that way is the game that we're going to be talking about today.
Oh, Frostgrave, yes. If people have not listened before to us, we have played Frostgrave for quite a few years.
Yes, and Frostgrave now has a second edition. And I think I mentioned this before. Frostgrave is currently my favorite game to play. So sometimes, though, if you're just getting into a game, even though Frostgrave, like you said, is a pretty easy game, relatively speaking, to get into, it is still a miniatures game. So there's still a lot going on to get into the game. So we thought it would be a good idea to start a Frostgrave series on everything about Frostgrave and all the knowledge we have, and going through the wizards and the world and all that kind of stuff. But the very, very first episode is how to get in at the very ground level. Like, if you have not seen Frostgrave at all, this in this podcast, we're going to tell you everything you need to know to get those miniatures on the table.
So you go and buy the 2-player starter box, right? Right?
Yes, exactly. But there's no 2-player starter box. So we'll tell you the next best thing where you cobble together your 2-player starter box. So at the very, very beginning, first, we've mentioned it a bunch, but like, assuming this reader or this listener doesn't know anything about Frostgrave, I think the first thing we should do is give them a brief explanation of what Frostgrave is and reasons you want to play it versus reasons you might not want to. This might not be the game for you. So at the very beginning, what is Frostgrave?
So Frostgrave is primarily meant to be a campaign game set in a fantasy setting, and it leans towards like the magical end of fantasy, and on the skirmish end, and you are out in a like ruined fantasy city full of like magical items, magical beasts that's mostly uninhabited, but there's some like things left over, whether they're like mostly not friendly to you. And you go to the city and you try and loot it to make your wizard richer and just more blinged out.
Yep. So you play as a bunch of wizards who are coming back to this frozen city that has thawed, that's filled with, like you said, magical items and things like that. So for you will be playing a wizard and the bunch of the wizard's apprentice and a bunch of mercenaries that the wizard has hired to loot this city. And like you said, most of the things are unfriendly, and most of the things are not quite human that you bump into. So things like, undead, wild animals, and also sometimes demons and constructs, except for the other humans, which are your enemies, the other wizards, which is the friends that you will be bringing to fight over the treasure with.
So yes, it is a competitive war game. And on like the snow-covered thing, like you see all the books, it's all full of snow. We rarely play on like tables with snow. I mean, it's really cool when you do assemble that sort of terrain, but you don't need to feel the need to have like everything you own be snow-based. Like any fantasy sort of terrain works well for the setting.
It's generally done. But I forgot, we're now putting this on YouTube. So for those who can see things, this is basically sums up the game. Says fantasy wargaming in the frozen city. And for those of you who are listening, it's two wizards having a wizard's duel as they fight over getting the treasure. Although technically speaking, your wizards will never get this close when they're fighting.
Yeah,
generally,
I'm thinking how often that's happened in years.
Yeah. Generally, they'll be casting spells on from afar against the guys, against their minions who they send out to get the treasure for them. Because you do not want to risk the life of your wizard. Because that's you. That's the personification of you. And why would you risk your life when you can send one of your minions to risk their life instead?
Yeah. So on the note of your minions, you basically have your wizard, your apprentice, and your 8 minions until you start doing weird things with upgrades and summoning people and all that. But it's basically you've got your 2 sort of spellcasters, and then you've got your 8 troops coming along with you. So it's pretty easy to build a warband from that standpoint. You're not worried, do I need lots of guys? Do I need a few guys? You're like, no, here's basically the number. Yeah,
so it's a great introductory game in many ways for people who are just getting into the hobby because of the small number of units that you need for your army. Like compared to the Warhammer 40,000 or even the middle-sized games like Bolt Action and stuff like that, that's a lot more dedication you need to play it. And the other thing is, because it's a fantasy game, a lot of people who play D&D already have 10 units of like soldiers and things like that when they have those things. And so it's a good game if you're coming from the role-playing aspect where you play with miniatures to just jump in, because you'll have a lot of the miniatures you need to play. Besides that, go on.
Yeah, and there are no factions for like your war band itself, so like you can use whatever sort of figures you want, and it doesn't really influence the direction you're building the guys. So if you want to play with a bunch of elves, if you want to play with a bunch of ratmen, you don't have to choose the faction per se and then choose your like warband guys out of that faction. It's all generic across.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where because it doesn't have it does have its own miniature set, but because it's so open on saying what you want to bring, it's a lot less restrictive for you to couple together 10 miniatures to go and play. Like for example, in our current campaign, one group is a bunch of rat men. Mine is a bunch of miniatures from Zombicide Black Plague. Yours are a bunch of War Machine witches that have been converted, and then the last guy has a bunch of Norse, like olden, like I think is it what do you call it? What's that game? Anyways, they're a bunch of medieval guys, so they're a little bit more on point in terms of the setting, kind of thing.
They feel kind of
but
more
again, I think it's like just Saga like miniatures, right? Yeah. So yeah, it's really easy to get into play, and as I've seen the people that play it, they really lean into that kind of aspect. So everyone is fine. If you bring a bunch of orcs, for example, or frog wizards and play, at least in our group, we're totally okay. A lot of the people actually I've seen online are totally okay with what you bring, right?
Yeah, because the fluff is all about sort of the setting, not so much about who you are. So in the game, you come up with who your group is and then bring it to the table.
You definitely will be a wizard. And I think that is possibly one of the biggest sticking points of the game, if whether this game is or is not for you, is that because the game is based around wizard on wizard combat, if you do not like wizards and you don't want to be a wizard, you might not enjoy it as much as other kind of games, for example, Mordheim or something like that. Like if you wanted to be like a shining knight and fighting other wizards, this is not the game, right? This is the game where you are like, oh, wizards are awesome. I like the fact that wizards are way more powerful than everyone else, right? Yep. Especially if you come from D&D, you just got to lean into the fact that spellcasters are in general, that's true. And yeah, you just got to enjoy that kind of thing. But if you are totally okay with wizards, this is like I said, this is my favorite game. It creates awesome battles with crazy things happening from the get-go, even from level 1. And because the wizards are the center, the game mechanics around that are relatively simple, and they don't feel like you're missing anything because the base game is simple, and then the thing that makes everything go crazy is the wizard spells, and they kind of are a layer on top. So it's easy to get into because you all know your base stuff, right? And then the wizard spells are the things that kind of throw things out of whack and allow you to do crazy things and break the rules of the game. So it just works really good, especially as like an intro game or it's your first game getting into it.
Yep. Yeah, I'm just thinking, like, people may think they're like, oh, well, it's a wizard, but I could build the wizard into a knight. Technically, you can kind of make your wizard really good at fighting, but in terms of, like, winning, you don't want your wizard to be killed because it disables the power of your warband so hugely. And if they die, they might not continue in the campaign. So even if you think you can make your wizard really good at fighting, it's probably a bad idea to try and actually carry it out, because maybe it works 4 games in a row, but on the 5th, where your wizard just gets stabbed, and now they have like some sort of permanent injury afterwards. You're like,
or just dead, and your warband gets disbanded.
Yeah, yes, you can build your wizard knight, but it's a very risky proposition.
Well, you can't necessarily do a knight because you can't have armor, but you can do a wizard barbarian. You can definitely do a wizard barbarian.
Yeah, well, there's armor spells that give you better armor. You could increase your stats, give yourself a 2-handed weapon on your wizard, and go run into battle. But that's not necessarily advisable.
Yeah, and honestly, like, because of the variety and different cool things that the wizard spells do, it is really not as interesting for your wizard to just buff themselves up, be super powerful, and punch people in the face with their whatever 2-handed sword. It's just not as cool as all the different things you can do with the spells, because the spells are not just like, oh, this spell is just a magical gun, basically, right? The spells do all sorts of different things with all sorts of different cool abilities, like turning invisible, pulling treasure, pushing a guy off a thing, transposing two people in different spots, summoning demons, all this kind of stuff. It's like there's so many different things that are so much more interesting and fun. Even if technically power level wise, it might be good to super buff your wizard and just have them destroy things in melee. It's not nearly as fun.
Yeah, like on future episodes, I think we'll get into sort of like the different directions you could build your wizard, because there are different wizard schools available to your wizard. So I don't know, any tips for people who are starting? Because like when you read through the rulebook, one of the first things it tells you to do is choose a wizard school for your wizard. So any tips on that first step?
Yeah, okay. Well, first of all, when you get in, if the things we've been talking about sound like something that would be interesting, yeah, pick up this book and read the first section. Even before you get this book is laid out pretty well in terms of getting in, because the first section is not like how to play. The first section is how to build your warband, and that's the first thing you want, right? Because I think it's because the game is centered around wizards. You want to build something that a warband that, and also because the game is played in a campaign, so you will probably be playing your warband, the same kind of warband for a bunch of levels. As they build up, they get stronger. You want to really like the warband that you start off with, right? So you probably want to choose, your first 10 starting guys, and your warband does change as you get more money, you can buy better guys, but you want guys that you will like playing with for the long run, especially your wizard and your apprentice. And so the first thing in this book is you choose your wizard and what kind of wizard your wizard is. And
there's some fluff text in there about like, oh, this type of wizard dresses this way, they like these sort of symbols. You don't necessarily have to follow that, but if you feel like really getting into it, they give you a little bit of that like background.
Yeah, and I think because they give you that background, it helps evoke what kind of miniatures or what kind of character you want your wizard to be, right? Again, this is a campaign game, and it's based around, your wizard, you are that wizard. So in a lot of ways, it makes the game a lot better if you fully, have that, like who your wizard is in your head when you build it out, and it'll make the game a lot more fun and interesting as you see your wizard grow and in power, right? And so the different,
So honestly, for the last warbands and the ones I'm building now, I've taken the opposite route. I'm like, okay, I like this style of miniature or this like look of a wizard. What type, like going through all those schools, and they're kind of like, I don't want to say stereotypical, but archetypical.
Quintessential,
maybe. Quintessential.
Yeah,
they're quintessential and archetypical.
Yeah.
So you kind of just buy, like I've always just bought miniature I think would make a cool wizard and be like, okay, what archetype does it fit? And then you choose one of the 10 schools, is it?
Yes, 10 schools of wizards.
Mm-hmm. I'm like, yeah, I'll just choose one of the schools that I think they fit into for the look of the mini.
Yeah, and it basically it covers basically all the different types of wizards you would think of in terms of archetypes. And I'll just go through and name them now. And each one is very evocative. And they also, I think in the old one, they had little pictures, little art of each one. In the new one, they also have more like designs and art, but they don't necessarily have all the different little pictures of them. But the 10 different schools are Chronomancer, which is, like time wizard. Elementalist, which is your normal wizard who shoots fireballs and things like that, summons walls. Enchanter, so someone who enchants weapons with magical abilities or creates constructs. Illusionist, who creates illusions and does weird like moving, like teleportation and stuff like that, and
turning people invisible.
Yeah, turning people invisible. And I think a lot of people in general, illusionist is in a lot of games is like a really weak school, but I really liked illusionist school in this thing. This is one of the best illusionist wizards, like with wizard spells that I've seen in any game. And then necromancer, which is almost self-explanatory, right? Undead, controlling undead, summoning zombies and stuff. Sigilist, who is like works on creating scrolls and word magic and runes. Soothsayer, who's sees into the future kind of thing. I think the main thing with Soothsayer is actually controlling people's minds.
Yeah.
Because one of the strongest spells in the game, mind control. Summoner, who summons demons. And then Thaumaturge, who is your like cleric kind of thing, healer. And then Witch, who is more animalistic, controls animals and has that more kind of foresty kind of wild person magic. Yep. So as you see, that's a lot of different types. Some of them which I don't even think of as a normal wizard school if I would think of wizard, but they have enough to cover all their kind of bases in different types.
Yeah, if you have some sort of like archetype you're thinking of, you can probably fit it into one of those. So I think that's the suggestion is as with any miniature game, you want to like enjoy the miniatures you're playing with. So I don't suggest like choosing your wizard school to be like powerful and having like the best spells. The schools are balanced enough, and the game is meant to be like a fun sort of fluffy game that like get the miniatures you want. That's what I would suggest.
And one of the important things to say, I'd say every single wizard school for your base one is relatively balanced, partially because you as a wizard, you cannot only cast your one type of school, right? So you are a wizard and you can actually cast any different type of spell from any other different school. It's just you're better at casting the ones from your main school, and you start with more spells from your main school. So what happens is you start with 3 spells from your main school, 1 from 3 different aligned schools, and then 2 from other ones. And you just basically, you're best at casting your own spells. You're a little worse at casting your aligned spells, and then you're not as good at casting the other spells, right? And so because of that, you don't have to feel like, you don't have to get as torn up about, I want to be able to, for example, summon a zombie, but I still also want to be able to, also summon a demon, let's say.
Or teleport around.
Yeah, or teleport around, right? You can do both in the game. So because of that, it's quite open, and a lot of it, really, you should be choosing your wizards based on, not on, the theme that you want to create. And not on power level or things like that.
No, Frostgrave's not meant to be about like having crushing victories. It's actually mostly the missions. Getting to that, missions are largely based around gathering treasure, which then you crack open at the end.
Yeah.
So it's not about just like killing your opponent's guys like epically. Which if you kill all of them, you probably get all the treasure.
You probably get all the treasure, yeah.
But if you find a way to like snatch all the treasure away through using your spells and get off, you've won because you got the treasure.
Yes. Yeah. So So basically, after you have chosen your school and chosen your spells, right? You also build your warband. And the thing is, again, your warband is like the type of units you can bring are the same for every single player, right? So you can't. It's not like Chronomancer has certain kind of warbands. You're all wizards who recruit basically human mercenaries to go and do it from the same list of mercenaries. And it's really about the type of spells that you can cast that really make your characters unique, as well as the treasure you collect to outfit your guys.
Yeah. So with the soldiers, the biggest difference I see between them, because the soldiers, when you look at the book, will be divided into your basic soldiers and your specialist soldiers. But the big difference in the type of soldiers is soldiers that are melee only and soldiers that have the ability to shoot as well. I would say those are the 2 big categories they fall into. And you have a limit of, the shooting soldiers are all specialist soldiers. And you have a limit of 4 specialist soldiers in your warband. So the thing is, if you want guys who are really good at fighting, they're often going to be specialists as well. So you have to kind of decide, okay, do I want like 3 shooting guys, 2 shooting guys? Do I want to shoot a lot with all 4 being shooting? That's kind of the main decision you make at the beginning, because if you start buying, you spend your initial points on some like specialist soldiers, that are really good at melee, but you figure the final destination for your warband is to have all guys with like crossbows, then maybe that's not your best pick to like take a melee guy as a specialist soldier.
Yeah, and because you max out at 4 specialist soldiers, sometimes if you might not want to, and you only have a certain amount when you start off, or you only have 300 gold to hire your guys. You might, if you have an idea of wanting all rangers at the end, you don't have enough money to buy all your rangers, right? So you might just buy 2 rangers, and then instead of buying, you don't have enough necessarily to buy that third. Instead of buying that archer, you might buy a normal, more expensive normal soldier, just to fill things out so that your characters can always be used later in the game, right? And so I think one of the hard things that people have when they see the game, right, and when the next thing they're looking at is buying their soldiers, right? People don't necessarily understand because they haven't played the game, right? They don't necessarily, and technically when you're reading this book, you will not have gotten to the rules of the game yet, right? So a lot of people have questions on what is a good starting warband. So in general, do you have any general kind of views on what a good starting warband is when you build it?
Honestly, I feel obliged to put in like 2 shooting guys at the very beginning.
Okay.
It just gives you the ability that something's running at you or trying to run away with treasure, that you can just reach out and touch it, versus like if you need to
with an arrow.
With an arrow, yes. Versus if you have to slowly chase the guy down across the board, you can be intercepted. It might take too long to get to them. I just feel like I need at the start to have 2 guys who can shoot.
Okay.
So
for me, actually, my main one is that at the start I have a different kind of view, and that is to start with more guys that I expect to be useful in the end, because I don't expect them to die, right? So I, in general, because of the amount of costs, don't necessarily take 2 shooting guys at the beginning. I start with 1, and then the first thing I want to do is buy that second shooting guy, which is generally a ranger. I will. Yep.
Yeah, you can take that approach. You start with 1 with the second one in mind.
Yeah.
So I don't think you should necessarily go towards having 3 and 4 shooting guys in the end, like unless that's really what you have in your mind. Because it's honestly, it doesn't. Fighting in close combat in the game is a really entertaining part of it. Just standing there and just being like pew pew pew. It's not like the game play style that Frostgrave really excels at.
And the other thing is that it might seem very, very powerful because when you start playing it, right? Because melee, whenever you fight a melee, you're equally at risk of winning and losing. So it seems like melee is a lot worse than shooting. But the game and the spells that have been put in there have really, in second edition, have really switched things up. And because you can only have 4 ranged guys, it changes the game a lot, so that you can never have an oversaturation of ranged units, right? So what it means is that if you're just plinking them with arrows, although that's very strong, even if you kill way more of their units, you won't be moving up. And so there's very likely good chance that you will still lose because you won't get all the treasure, right? And again, this game is about getting treasure, not about killing your entire enemy's warband.
Yeah, you've got to get up close and personal to haul the treasure off. So
yeah, so that kind of balancing. So with that in mind, I think let's go through a couple of good starting warbands. I think the main thing is, so you can fill out your warband with thugs and thieves, right? That don't cost money. So the main thing is you have 300 gold after you've purchased your apprentice to buy soldiers for your starting warband. And it's really about spending that 300 gold and then filling out everything else with thugs and thieves, right, who are free. In general, when you have the leftovers, you just want to build it like probably half thugs and thieves. That's in general what I do. But for that 300 gold, what would you choose as what you would spend for an example warband?
I pulled one up, but it was using Javelineers, which
Sure.
I don't suggest you actually start with using those things because they come in an expansion book, and like it's best when you're just getting started to buy the base book, because the rule book, because it's the second edition, there's some things from the previous editions that roll over.
Mm-hmm.
But I would suggest, as Alan said, if you're trying to like build towards a final rule warband, maybe not buying some of the cheaper specialist soldiers, because there's slightly better versions to be had of them that maybe you would have preferred to like have the better version later on. And instead of spending like 100 on getting like the starting version of like someone who's like got a pretty good at fighting but only has less armor, maybe you want the better version later on that's worth 125.
Yep.
That I suggest just buying the better versions to start with. So if you think you want to just hang out and shoot, then maybe you want to go for like a marksman, because marksmen have a bit more armor and they have a crossbow that does a bit more damage than bows. If you just are thinking of sitting at the back and shooting and having sort of like a turret built around your wizard, the marksman is a good way to go. Or if you think you want to just be running and gunning, maybe buy one of the more expensive ones of a ranger, because they have the highest movement amongst your soldiers, and they can also shoot the bow. So I suggest like picking one of the two of those to start with. So they're both 125. And then possibly going for like one of the 75-point starting soldiers, which would be are those the man-at-arms?
It's the man-at-arms and the healing guy.
Yeah, or the apothecary.
What do you call it? The apothecary, yes.
Yeah. So I don't know. I'm a pretty big fan of the man-at-arms.
Yeah, he's a great actual final guy as well, because he's a normal soldier, so he fits in on one of those four. But he's basically the best at fighting that you can get for a normal soldier.
Yeah.
And keeping the line.
Yeah, because you're going to have four of those in all likelihood, even at the end of the game. So you don't feel like you've wasted your money if you have that guy left at the end. You're going to hope he doesn't die.
Exactly, yep. So you would say, would you think like one ranger or marksman and then two men-at-arms is a good start?
I mean, that would leave you with 25 gold lying around. Yeah. I generally don't like leaving gold lying around. I don't know.
But you could save that to eventually get, as you get more gold when you play games, you can pretty quickly buy, like, let's say another ranger or an archer or a marksman or something like that. So I think that's a pretty good start.
Yep.
And the two man-at-arms are quite tough for your starting warband, so they're really good. I would say that's a great start.
I find often, though, I will just then with that last 100 buy a crossbowman or an archer. Which, yes, you're leaving the better options off that you could have paid more for later. But I find just having them at the very beginning lets you like get that edge in playing the game early on, which may get you more treasure. So just having two shooting people, like one in the game, shooting someone with an arrow once and hitting them, probably not going to kill them. Whereas if you've got, say, an archer and your ranger that both manage to hit, like you may not hit, sure. But if you land two shots of those, there's a chance you might actually kill the thing you're shooting at.
Yep.
So I find having two of them gives you kind of an edge. If somebody's trying to run away with the treasure, you shoot them in the back twice.
Sure.
And then you come and you grab it. So even though you may not be able to get the two best shooting ones at the very top of the game, it's okay to take a lesser version of the shooting one, I find.
So here is one where it's a stronger start with that in mind, but not necessarily, you will have somewhat want to replace some of the guys later on. Yep. So with that, I think the strongest start actually would be archer, man-at-arms. So that is 300 right there.
Yep.
But I actually think that's probably the strongest start you can get. Now, both archers are specialist soldiers, but you generally will want to end up replacing them with better soldiers when you have the money, right? That said, there's all sorts of different ways to spend money. Like you will never have a point where you have too much money in the game, basically, because there's always something to spend money on in the game.
Yeah, unless you play for years and years with the same
sure.
warband, which I don't suggest doing that. But if you did that, you would have you might get a lot of money.
But for the first 10, 15 games, you probably still have lots of different things you can spend your money on.
Yeah.
So I think a good start in terms of just general power level, like I said, Archer, Man-at-Arms, Man-at-Arms. Mm-hmm. My general go-to is Ranger, Barbarian, Infantryman. Now, the Infantryman is generally the one that is going to want to be replaced, but because he's a normal soldier, he generally just ends up dying at some point because, you send him out, he fights. He will generally lose eventually, especially to stronger guys. So you end up just replacing him in general. But the Ranger and the Barbarian, if they don't die, they are like solid things you want at the end. Barbarian's not quite as good as Templar, but at the same time, I like my Barbarian miniatures. So in general, I choose Barbarian over Templar.
Yeah,
Barbarian's a bit weak in my opinion, but overall, he's still usable.
Yeah, like I've taken a Barbarian too, just because I'm like, well, here's the miniature I want to use. Okay, fine, I take a slight hit on the stats.
Yeah.
But whatever.
I think basically everyone in our, not everyone, most of the people in our last couple of campaigns took Barbarians over Templars or Knights, but it was basically just miniatures. Because we all agree Barbarians are weaker than Knights and Templars. Yeah. We still take them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So just so you know what you're getting into. The game's not meant to be not best played hyper competitively.
The final one that I think is pretty strong is Treasure Hunter, Archer, and Ranger. So again, in the thing you're talking about, Archer and Ranger are both very good, are good at shooting. Ranger is a top level shooting unit. And then Treasure Hunter is also a medium level kind of guy, but he's also a top level unit specialist because he moves 7. So speed is very, very important in the game because the point of the game is to run towards treasure, grab them, and get off the board. And so the Treasure Hunter is very, very good at doing that. Will also be able to fight people off because he has 3 fight, right? So he has a little bit better fight. He moves fast. And also because he doesn't carry something cumbersome like a 2-handed weapon or a bow or something like that, he doesn't get a negative to fight when he picks up a treasure. So it's a great unit. All right, and I think those are pretty good examples of starting soldiers you might want to get. Now that you've chosen your wizard and your wizard school and your warband, are we missing something? I guess we didn't go through. I guess there's 2 things. One is choosing your wizard spells, but I think that's too much to go through right now.
Yeah, I think for each wizard and for each there's different types of builds you might do. I think we'll go deeper into those on future episodes. Whether we go through them school by school or maybe we go through a build by build. Think about that because there's you could build towards a shooting faction, you could build towards a buffing thing, you could build towards a summoning thing, and there's not necessarily one school for all those. So we may approach it by that, or might approach it by school. We'll see.
And I would say, just as a general overview, is when you choose all your spells, you probably want at least one that is good at movement, that allows you to move faster than just the normal move. Now, it's not that you can't do it without those things, but especially when you're starting out, you will definitely want something like that. So something like Leap, Telekinesis, which is kind of like moving fast because you move the treasure closer to you. Transpose or something like that is really useful to have. Besides that, you can take whatever you want.
Yeah, I would suggest considering a shooting attack that's magic type as well.
Oh, yes.
Just because there's certain enemies that are just immune to every other type of attack. And if they come at you, you will, until you've bought special magical weapons, you'll have no ability to kill them, and they'll keep harassing and killing your guys unless you have one of those spells. You don't have to, but it's strongly suggested that things could go really awry if you don't have one of those.
That's a good point. So one way to get magical attacks, whether that is a magical attack like a grenade or something like that, or enchant weapon, which turns your weapon into magic, and then one that helps you go faster. So with that in mind, besides that, you can generally go ham with the rest of the stuff.
It's not set in stone because my current warband, I didn't do any of that. Like, whatever.
Yeah, he's doing pretty well, I gotta say. Yeah, that said, we have had a lot of experience, and when you start the game, it'll be a lot harder to play if you don't understand your limitations. So having those two is a good start.
Yeah.
All right, the next thing. Now that you have your warband, you have an idea of what spells, you chose that stuff, you got your warband, you assembled them, you painted them up beautifully. What's next?
I didn't paint them up beautifully. That's one of my fastest painted miniatures I have. I don't
They're
know why
still beautiful.
Thank you. But you don't.
Painted miniatures are always beautiful.
Exactly. Just get them painted. It's cool.
So after that, what's next?
So I guess once you get into the game, the missions will be throwing dudes at you.
Yes. So now you have to think about what you actually need now that you have your warbands. And obviously, you probably need a friend who also done the same thing and gotten this book.
Or just download it from DriveThruRPG or Osprey War Games like I did.
Because you just or Google Books.
Yeah, you throw it on your phone, just pull it up. It's mostly about reading the missions once you've played it for a while, but there's lots of cool missions. You want to be able to have the book on hand to play the missions.
Yeah. So after you have that, you will need a battlefield, and also you will need, especially for certain missions, but basically all the time, you will need wandering monsters. So because,
So do you want to start talking about the battlefield, or do you want to start talking about the wandering monsters first?
Let's do the battlefield first, because technically when you play a game, you will set up the battlefield first, and then you will put the wandering monsters when you start playing. So
yeah. So the first thing that comes to mind about building the battlefield for me is almost like Mantic stuff, like Mantic terrain kits with a bunch of walls in them. Because walls, the missions will often talk about like having rooms and stuff in them. Not necessarily, but it just helps because you're supposed to be in a bunch of the buildings of the Frozen City. So rather than having like buildings themselves to walk around, because you're supposed to be inside a bunch of buildings, they're supposed to be really huge and like grand buildings. We've found that to build tables with lots of variety, having wall sections just kind of turn into mazes, turn into buildings, turn into all that. It ends up being really versatile. Like I know you've just made some out of styrofoam rather than going and buying them. I also made some out of like textured plastic art, but that takes time. So maybe just getting a bunch of like boxes of Mantic walls, like not the short ones, but taller ones in ruins, because the city is meant to be ruined.
Yes.
Could be a quick way of just getting your stuff right on the board.
Yeah, so I guess taking one more like high-level view is that Frostgrave is you generally play it on a 3-foot by 3-foot table, so it's relatively small. But the issue with it is that it's supposed to be a very terrain-dense game. So there is a line. It's somewhat annoying in the book. There's no diagrams. But there is a description that says you at ground level, so you're playing in a city, right? So when you think about a city, there's lots of buildings, right? But it also says when you're playing, despite playing on a 3x3 board, it says there should never be at ground level any line of sight that is longer than 24 inches, right? And that kind of gives you an idea that there should be a lot of terrain on, right? It's not just like everything's 24 inches. There should be, most of the ways you shouldn't necessarily be able to see these 24-inch fire lanes. And technically, even despite that, if you have something over 24 inches, you still can't shoot over it, even if you're like above the building, presumably because it's snowy and the visibility is not very good. But so because of that, you need a lot of terrain, and that's why I think you were talking about getting, quick Mantic terrain, just to get it on the table to fill that out. But if you don't have that, creating simple styrofoam, like the foam board ruins. There's a very common technique where you take foam board. If you're really joshing to go play, you've painted up these beautiful things. You can create Foam board is like the things you buy from the dollar store where they have the foam inside.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a half a centimeter. There's foam inside and then a thick cardstock on the two different sides. And they're pretty cheap. It's like $1, $2, I think, for a big sheet. And you basically cut it into a corner ruin. And there's lots of designs that you can find online for creating these things. And they won't necessarily be super beautiful or survivable as if you go out and buy the pink foam that I built my walls out of. But they're really quick, and you can glue them together just using, craft glue, the white glue, right? And get a whole city of terrain, which done in like, I don't know, a few hours, maybe like four hours or so, right? To fill out your terrain. And it's relatively cheap as well to do that if you can't go and afford, the Mantic stuff. Like you said, Mantic, you just have to throw money at it. Mm-hmm. And you can fill up your thing, but if you are wanting to do it on a budget, you just need another 4 hours or something like that. Get something quick. If you get the black one, you could just maybe splash a little bit of, or even just
some dry brush over it. And,
there is foam in the center. You got to be careful about spray paint, but a quick large brush to just put some grays and browns on it can really get your city up and going.
Yeah, it's a decent material. It's widely available. Yeah, you can bend it into shapes, cut windows out of the top of it to make it into ruins that fit the theme of the game. Yeah, and then like I said, they're basically walls.
Top layers. Them. And you can put little platforms, gluing them on so your miniatures can go up and climb up and shoot people from above. I think that's probably the easiest way to go about getting, your terrain done. And like I said, you need a lot of terrain. So if you start off with that, even if you buy nice terrain and you want to paint it up nice, it's nice to have this more disposable terrain, at least at the start, and slowly replace it as you play with nicer terrain as you make it and paint it up.
Yeah, I don't feel like you need fully modeled buildings for this game. How the gameplay works, it doesn't seem to lend itself to that. Like having a few outbuildings between the bigger wall sections is kind of cool. But I don't think anyone should feel obliged to own tons of MDF terrain with big buildings or anything else like that. It's not necessary.
You say we shouldn't feel obliged, but we all do.
I have a city with buildings with full interiors, roofs, opening doors. It's worth going to that level if you really like the game.
So fun. Yeah.
And
it's good if you want to play all sorts of different games. I also have cities built and things like that, specifically for Frostgrave, but also to play any kind of medieval fantasy kind of city game.
All right, so I think that covers the board. If you want to get a winter mat, get a winter mat. Otherwise, just any 3x3 or 4x4 mat, and you just shrink it down, is perfectly good. So having a mat's nice to play on, though.
All right. And that goes to the next thing we mentioned, which is once you start, having your guys on the table, and you've laid out your terrain and you have a beautiful city fully painted and modeled, I guess you also need treasure tokens.
Oh, yes. Yeah, treasure's important. You want to have cool-looking things to fight over, definitely.
So you need 5 treasure tokens. They just need to be, the same base as 20 millimeter or 25 millimeter. Just they're tokens to fight over. If you don't have those, you can just use whatever kind of tokens you want.
Yeah, you can use other paper-based ones or just model them out of whatever.
It's just more fun when you have treasure chests, and those ones are relatively easy. I think the easiest way to get them is Mantic or D&D ones, right? Obviously, treasure chests are relatively easy to find because of D&D. So,
Mantic's a good source. If you want to throw money at it, you can throw money at Mantic, and you'll get lots of these things, which I think sort of fits into the next part where. So in the game, you do encounter monsters that will either be on the board at the start, or when you pick up treasure, you then roll and monsters randomly appear.
Yeah, it is so fun. I don't understand why this doesn't happen in all other games now. I'm like, man, this is amazing. Like when we started playing it, you think it's just about wizard on wizard action, but when random monsters show up on random places, it changes like the dynamic, and it makes the city feel also more alive as well, which is kind of surprising. And our group started liking monsters so much, we started trying to make more monsters show up. And Joe McCullough also, who's the author of the game, also thought that too, because it used to be, I think monsters only showed up on a 12 or something like that, or 14 or something.
14, I think. Yeah, it was really high.
And then he changed it for second edition, obviously noticing that everyone just liked more monsters. So now it's at a 10 plus on a D20, which means more likely than not, a monster will show up when you pick up a treasure. And there are 5 treasures in a normal game, so you're probably going to at least see 2 monsters every game.
Yeah, because when you see like how the game deploys, it's like, okay, here's one wizard versus another wizard. But as you play through the game, you might just end up bogged down by the monsters so badly that you're not fighting each other all that much. You're just hoping to survive if some crazy monsters start appearing on you, or if the mission just keeps bringing in wave after wave of them. So don't feel like it's just you versus the other player all the time. A lot of it's you versus the game.
So. Yeah. All right. So when you choose these monsters, what kind of monsters will generally show up, and what do you need to make sure that when you're playing it, you will be able to put these things on the table?
So a lot of types of monsters, like if you think of a ghoul and a zombie, you're like, I could probably make those interchangeable. They have wolves and wild dogs. So like, okay, to start with, I don't necessarily need models for both of these. And then sometimes bigger monsters show up, like, say, a
greater demon?
A greater demon, yeah. Yeah, there's bears as animals. But I'm just thinking of, like, the giants. There's giants, and there's also, like, I don't have a problem reading this, but anyhow.
Yep.
Those are frost giants.
I think you've noticed from the way we're talking about it, there's a lot of different monsters that actually show up. Now, when you're just getting into it, if you do not have if you're a D&D player and you play with miniatures, you probably have all these monsters, and you'll probably be super happy to like put them on the table for your gameplay, like search them out when you roll like a 1 in, generally when you summon monsters, like you roll 2d20, and then so you have like 1 in 400 chance, right, for certain things. So you have like a 1 in 200 chance guy and something, and it shows up like I guess you said like a frost giant. When that shows up, you'll be super excited to run over and get your miniatures. But I don't think you necessarily need all of those things, because the chart there's like a lot of different monsters, and you kind of, like you said, want to have the minimum number of monsters so you can get right into the game, right?
Yep. So there are 23 like monsters that may appear as a result of like picking up treasure. But many of them are like similar enough that you don't feel like you have to own the entire what they call the bestiary in Frostgrave. So
what do you think are critical?
The rats are critical, because I actually put together a spreadsheet based on probabilities and all that, like how many will appear per 100 encounters.
Yeah.
And apparently every like 100 encounters you'll end up with like 20 rats. So that's every 100 encounters. So you don't feel like you have to own 20 rats. But only a couple rats.
They're giant rats, though.
Giant rats, yes. Not just teeny rats.
So I would say there's a couple of things. So there are, the way I kind of classify them is you have the undead creatures, right? Then you have the animals.
Size ones.
Yeah, the smaller animals. Then you have smaller like creatures, like demons. And then you have big monsters, right? Yep. So I would say that's kind of what you want. Oh, and then there's a couple of ones that I generally like to have. So to me, you definitely need, like you said, like rats. Now rats, if you get rat models, giant rats, you could also use, instead of rats, in a pinch, you could use wolves, right? As long as they're normal sized wolves, not giant wolves, right? And basically, whenever any dogs, wolves, rats, boars, those kind of animals show up, you can just use wild animal. as the thing. So you want a few of those models, probably like three, maybe maximum like 4 of those type of models to kind of fill those out. And then I say you also want some undead, because often when undead show up, a bunch of them show up.
Yeah, so like zombies will show up, ghouls, armored skeletons. They're all things that show up they're above average for how often they show up.
And because they show up, you probably also want 3 or 4 of those as well. And then you also kind of want wraiths. Now the reason why is that although wraiths are decently common, they're not that common. There's actually a mission in the main rulebook where you have a whole bunch of wraiths show up.
Yep. So
depending on your undead models, you might want to be able to do double duty with wraiths, or you might want to have your own like generally having at least 1 wraith is good, right? And then filling out for the wraith mission, just filling it out with extra, zombies and skeletons to say they're wraiths.
Mm-hmm.
And then you probably want something big and a little bit like a demon, like a big demon,
or like
to fill
ogre.
in for, or ogre or something like that,
Right.
to fill in for when a troll, ogre, werewolf, gorilla, white gorilla, or a demon shows up, something like that. And they can basically pull on double duty because all those things are rare. You only need maybe 1 of those kind of miniatures, and you'll generally be fine.
Yeah, whatever. They show up about the same regularity, so whatever you feel like you think is cool, or you already have that around.
And then I guess the last thing is imps are relatively common.
Mm-hmm.
Not because it's that common on the chart, it's decently common, but because you can summon imps.
Yep. You might want someone, or you might you might gain the spell throughout the game to have the imp. So no.
And in a lot of other like expansions and stuff, there's little creatures, so it's good to have a couple of small monsters on the table, and they can also sub in for rats if you run out of your animals, right? So I would say overall, you probably actually need at least like 10 monsters, probably like maybe 4 animals, right? Like rat, dog-sized animals, 3 or maybe 4 kind of zombie skeleton kind of guys, a couple of imps, a large demon, or troll-like monster, a wraith, and a bear. Bear is because they're also awesome, and a bear is kind of quintessential. Like, I guess you could substitute a demon for a bear, but it doesn't your troll for a bear, but it doesn't seem right?
Mm-hmm.
So to me, actually, when I counted those all up, that's actually 12 monsters. But that to me is like a good bestiary to have to cover all your bases. Now, of course, if you only have like 6 models, you just have to you could just have 6 zombies and just know which one shows up and just play them differently. But it's just cooler if you have the different things. So you probably, though, at the bare minimum, need 6 or 7 models.
Yeah, so just to accomplish that, like on a budget with cool models, and for things you don't already have, I really suggest just looking at the WizKids range. That they have like all the quintessential D&D models in it. It's easy to pick out these things from them. They usually come in packs of 2, so you're getting a couple of them at once, and they're super cheap. And the sculpts are pretty nice too. Like, they're not the most high detail sculpts, but because you want to paint these things up pretty quickly, because they're just like the monsters, I think that's like one of the best sources out there for those sort of minis.
Yeah, I think for minimum, I would say 3 undead, 3 animals, and 1 large monster. And you will have to be substituting for the models, because obviously, there's so many different animals, they won't be the right one. But that should generally give you a decent chance of covering your bases and having something that looks kind of like what's showing up.
Yeah, like you and I don't even own the full bestiary. One of our other friends has gone through the effort of just like...
I own the full bestiary.
Oh, you have all the rats. Really?
Yeah, I do have rats. Yeah, and they're just scattered in a whole bunch of different boxes because I play all these different games, but I do have the full bestiary.
So if you went hunting through all your boxes, you could like, oh no, wait. 20 minutes later, you'll come out with the armored skeleton of your dreams.
Exactly. So I do actually have the full bestiary. Nice. Yeah. All right. So with that, I guess that means a minimum you probably need 7 extra models after your warband to get playing. But again, you can often split that up between the different people playing. So you might want to concentrate on the undead, or let's say you have undead from another force. let's say you play a different game that has undead a lot. You might have the undead and your friend might have the animals and like things like that. And if you both bring, 4 or 5 models, you got a lot of models there to fill out your bestiary.
Yep. All right, so we talked about terrain, we talked about models. I think that gets all the stuff you need. It just uses, we didn't talk about dice at the beginning, but that's pretty obvious. It uses a D20 basically.
20, yes. Yeah. 20-sided dice, the same thing you do when you play D&D. So obviously, if you're playing D&D, this is a great first war game. And last war game, because this is my favorite. So if you want to go and try out war games and you're a D&D player, definitely it should be really easy for you to get into this game. I guess, we went through how you're getting into your first games. I think the only thing we haven't talked about in terms of a lot of what beginners might have questions for is that there's a lot of Frostgrave books besides the first book. And people often ask, which books should they pick up next?
So there's some books are first edition and some are second edition. And honestly, if you're a new player, you might as well just stick to the second edition ones, so you don't have to like figure out what belongs. You disagree.
Yes.
Really, you want to go back in time? You shouldn't just. Yes. Well, honestly, if you're a brand new player,
you're so obsessed with new and hotness. I think a lot of the initial ones are really good books, and they work fine in general. There's actually in the back of second edition book, there is a list of things that you can do to update the things in the first edition to get them to work with second edition.
So I think the first thing suggesting to new players would be don't embark on a permanent campaign right away. Maybe with your friends play 2 of the missions out of the first book, just to get a feel for how the whole game goes. 3? You're saying maybe 2, 3?
I'd say 3. I'd say
they can play
3
quickly,
games. So they play pretty quickly. You might even play the first, one kind of game to get to understand it, and by the third game, you've probably got a fairly good grasp and understanding of what type of game you want to play and if the game is for you or not, right?
So embark on a 3-game long campaign, just so you don't feel like you're screwing yourself permanently if you do something stupidly with choosing spells, you spend your money poorly, whatever. Just go on 3 missions and just to get a feel for it out of the starting book.
Yeah, and the starting book is really good. It has 20 different missions. So if you just play the missions out of the starting book, that's a lot of content. And one of the great things about Frostgrave, I think we mentioned before, is the missions are great and quite varied. The first mission is really simple, but they quickly get more and more complicated, right? With more and more things, and sometimes you even need to have special terrain and special units, like we mentioned, the further you get into the book. So there's a lot of content if you just stick with the main book.
So in the expansion books are largely sort of the campaigns take you through a story of you traveling through a certain place or chasing after a lich lord, a special character like that. The starting book, is it bringing you through a whole story like the expansion book so much, or is it more just a variety of missions?
It's just it's a variety of missions, so you can basically choose them. I think there's you can roll up missions down to there's 20, right?
Yep.
And play them out. And that's partially why I would say you want to buy expansion books, because so each expansion book comes with a bunch of different things. They will sometimes have different rules that help to flesh out certain things. They will have new soldiers you can take, and then they will also have new missions or scenarios or even campaigns with new treasure. And to me, the most important of those 3 is the missions, the campaigns with new missions and new treasure that really kind of change the game up. I think the new soldiers might feel like extra content that you need, but from how we have played it, I think it's not nearly as important to buy a book for those new soldiers. They mostly cover off what you need, and because the cool things are more in your wizard and the spells they cast, and then on top of that the treasure to upgrade your soldiers, you don't necessarily need full new soldiers as much as you would in other types of games. That said,
it's just more fun to play through the game instead of just choosing random missions. The game becomes so much more fun when you feel like you're going through a story. And like you said, that's why you're suggesting those other books to give you that whole story-based campaign. Yeah,
I would say this is the one that's the best. This is the most bang for your buck. It's called Thaw of the Lich Lord. So because this actually has all the things that you want.
Yeah, and how many missions long is it? It's 10 missions long?
It's 10 missions. It's a campaign. So if you want a more thematic kind of thing, the Thaw of the Lich Lord, you play a campaign where you're building. But basically, the story is a Lich Lord is rising, and you're kind of playing through it up until your confrontation with the Lich Lord, and it's not like a branching path, so it's not exactly like an RPG. It's more like a JRPG when you think about it, where you're doing stuff, you're leveling up your guys, you have your own inner conflict, and you're still fighting the opponent, right? But the Lich Lord starts to kind of insert himself between your battles with your friends, right? And so that is, I found, very, very fun, and it kind of gives helps to give a thematic arc to the different battles you're having against your friend, right? So I think this is simple. It's easy to play. It's relatively short. It has a lot of cool different stuff. But the other thing is, like it has its own treasure that is interesting and fun. And then the other thing is, this actually does have a couple of new units that are actually kind of good. Now, a lot of the units are hit or miss. But this has the Crowmaster and the Javelineer, which are two units. I think you mentioned the Javelineer, that if you wanted a couple more units just to spice up your game, those two units are quite a good addition. And they're decently balanced, so they're not like overpowered or anything like that. And you can play this game with those things, and you can have a lot of fun doing that.
Yeah, no, we've played through that campaign, and it was really fun. So think that yes, and that is a second edition book.
No, it was a first edition book. That's why I said
so we didn't even notice
the
fact that it was first edition when we played through it.
We played this in first edition.
It did. Well, all the time is messed up because the second edition came out in 2020 and everything is.
Yes, we played this in first edition. Yes, like you said, COVID has screwed up time, but yeah, this is great. It's still good today. Great thing to play through, still works, and you don't really have to change anything. There's only one small thing where a couple of soldiers they tell that there was never there was no specialist and normal soldiers in first edition, so you have to look into the second edition book to see which of those soldiers are which. But besides that, you can play through this book and play it exactly as is. I guess selling magical items. Again, you just sell them for 40%. As long as you know that, you're good to go.
Yep, the new book tells you that.
Yep. So that's why I'd say this is the first book. If you want to buy one expansion, I would buy Thaw of the Lich Lord. Besides that, I'd say for the new books, I would probably we haven't actually played this, but based on what we've been talking about, I think the best one is the Red King. Because the other two that have come out, Fireheart and Blood Legacy, are a little bit more advanced for people who have played a lot of books, a lot of games. And the Red King does seem a little bit more advanced, but it also is mainly a campaign book. And it's kind of cool because the campaign is broken out into 5 mission campaigns or 4 mission campaigns, I believe.
Yeah, it's kind of 3 acts to the story.
Exactly. So that helps you, if you're getting into it, you can play a couple of games, play the 4 mission campaign, right, for that act, and get the treasures and things like that. And then you can move back to playing different things. Just, it's a lot more easy to have smaller bites before you commit to a larger campaign. Like, for example, we're playing through Maze of Malcor right now, which is a first edition book. That's 12 missions. So that's a lot more commitment than, telling your friends, let's just play 4 games, play the first act of the Red King, and if you like that, you can come back maybe even a few months later, right? So
yeah, you don't feel like you're committed to the full thing. You still feel like you've completed something. So yeah.
Yeah. So I'd say Thaw of Lichlord number 1, the Red King number 2, and I think which is second edition. And then the last thing that I would recommend is Ulterior Motives when you've played a little bit more. Because Ulterior Motives is a card expansion that gives you secondary secret objectives whenever you play. So normally you're fighting over what the mission says, which is generally just the treasure, but Ulterior Motives gives you another different thing, and it's like 40 different secondary like secret objectives that you can do. It adds a lot of fun for one-on-one combat.
Yeah, I was going to say, especially for one-on-one, I find that's really fun, which then brings us to the other way the game can be played, as not necessarily 1-by-1 versus 1, but 3 players on the board, 4 players on the board. Because from playing the Maze of Melkor right now, a lot of the missions give you like extra instructions for what happens when you have like more than 2 players. Say you have 3+ players, 4 players. It gives you extra little instructions for how to modify the mission to play with that. Because the game creator seems to know that people have a lot of fun playing with more than just 2 people on the board.
Yep. And so for us, we find playing with three players is the best.
Yep.
Most fun, and you know, adding a player adds the commensurate amount of time. So it's not like, so it does take a lot more time, right? Like 4 players will make your game take double the time. And even though Frostgrave doesn't take that much time, like you'll play a 2-player game, maybe an hour and a half, right? With or less, right? We can generally play a 2-player game, hour and a half or less. When you have 4 players, that's like 3 hours, maybe even more, depending on the interactions. Yep. So that suddenly is a long period of time, right? So for us, 3 players, the perfect amount of time. It ends up being what, 2.5 hours, right?
Yep, to play through a mission.
To play through a mission, which is ideal. And then it's kind of self-balancing in a lot of ways, because, you know, if one person is doing too well, the other 2 team up. But
when someone grabs 20 treasures, you're like, well, you've got 20 treasures. We're not letting you get away with all those.
Yes.
It works
really
well that way.
So the only thing that I found is that when you play 3 players, the players who play have to know how to play multiplayer. A lot of people who get into a game don't really understand how to play multiplayer games, and so they will rush to the center first and don't understand by rushing into the center you have basically sandwiched yourself between the 2 enemies, where the 2 other players can't even attack themselves. They have to attack through you to attack each other. So even if they are not trying to team up on you at all, if you don't understand that going in the center means that you will be the center of attacks, you will feel like you're getting ganged up on, when really it's, you just have to understand those kind of the dynamics between multiplayer games.
Yeah, so honestly, if you want to get more than 1 friend into the game at once, it's honestly better to get like a bunch of friends into it all at once. Yeah. And I feel like, we don't have an even number of players to play one-on-one. That's perfectly fine. You have 5 people in it. You play 3 on one table, 2 on another, and that's a good time. You don't have to worry about we won't have like matchups for everybody. No, you don't need to worry about that at all.
Yeah, it's great. Like, and it's so much fun when you have 3 different players. You have so many more different spells going on and so much more chaos, right? It's such a good time.
And honestly, if you have 4 people show up and you could play 2-on-2 and another 2-on-2, or you could play 4 on one table, our suggestion, just put all 4 on one table and just bump the table size up from 3x3 to 4-on-4, and it's more fun that way than just playing 2 1-on-1 games.
Actually, we've been playing 3x3 with 4 players, and it's great. I don't even think you need to bump it up 4x4. I think it's actually better if you keep it smaller.
As long as you have enough terrain to like make some paths around, so you can't just like run straight at the other guy.
You do have to have enough terrain for a 4x4, but if you have enough terrain, which is technically how it's supposed to play, you can play a 4-person free-for-all on a 3x3 table where you take corners or side edges, you can even do, right? And it plays different but still super fun. Again, the biggest issue for me for 4 players is just the amount of time it takes.
So the other note of like how the table is built is often missions will have you coming through doors. Do you think it's worth getting like making some doors as well as part of the table? Just coming back to that.
I think that's more about certain missions. Like the current one we're playing, Maze of Malcor, because it's supposed to be in the old, like in the Maze of Malcor, which is the old university. You're doing a lot of inside things where there's doors. In most of the other missions, it's mostly outside in the city, so you don't necessarily need that unless you buy a new book and you want to play the missions, and you're like, oh well. When you do that, you need to collect. You do have to do some hobbying to build the kind of terrain you need to play the mission, or you could just use little paper chits, right? Just tear a little piece of paper off and label things. You can do that as well.
So if we did suggest people play Thaw of the Lich Lord, is there anything in particular they should build in addition to what we talked about?
You'll need a lot more undead.
Okay, there you go. That's very true.
Yeah. And you definitely need magic weapons if you play Thaw of the Lich Lord. Although technically you also need it for Maze of Malcor because there's lots of undead. There's just lots of undead in the Frozen City. You probably want more you want those magic weapons.
Yeah.
All right. So we've gone through the game, how you want to start your wizard, the spells, your wizard's warband, the terrain you need, the monsters you want to put on, and finally the extra books you want to get. Is there anything else, last kind of ideas on Frostgrave for getting into the game that you wanted to mention?
Yeah, it's basically like arranging how to play with your friends might be one thing to talk about right now, because that doesn't really fit into. Later on in some future episodes, we'll get into like different builds you can do. But like, how would you suggest arranging to get together with friends to do this? Would you try and do 2 games in one day? If you're meeting at the game store, like after work, just do 1 game? Like, how would you suggest setting all that up? Because that's an issue for every game, but this is game specific, kind of.
I think if you're playing one-on-one, you can fit it in a lot more easily because it'll only take 2 hours, under 2 hours. Set up the table, play the game, right? So you can fit it in anywhere. When you're playing a larger group, I think a little bit more time is warranted, right? And for us, this is our advice for every single game. After you play the games, go out for dinner or drinks or something like that to help have time to talk about the game. Even if you're playing with some people that you don't know as well, right? Like some people in the same club, it's a great way to bond over it. And if you're playing with your friends, it's a great time to talk over the game you've just played. Sometimes when I play with friends, and you don't it's a fun game, but then you kind of rush home or you got something to do. You don't have time to decompress, talk about the game, regale about it. It's just a general good idea whenever you do anything hobby related, not just miniatures, to have that kind of portion in it.
Yeah, and Frostgrave really lends itself to that because after the game, you've got to roll to see if your guys got knocked out of commission, whether they got injured, they died, what was inside those treasure chests. You go through rolling all that up, and then maybe you buy your stuff then, maybe you buy your new stuff later. So yeah, it just lends itself to casually meeting up later. Or just casually going out for food, drinks after, and then making all those rolls. Because there's even more, the game is kind of continuing at that point, but you don't need the whole table to play out that part of the game. You just make some rolls, look at the tables, see what happens.
Yep, and for, I guess before COVID, we did that so much that the people at the local pub knew when we came in and had our tables, they knew about Frostgrave because we did it so often to open those books and roll that kind of stuff. So yeah. The last, I guess for me, the last thing I'd want to talk about is there actually is a type, I guess a relatively annoying misprint in the current books for Frostgrave 2nd edition. There is a missing item. So, if you ever roll a ring of transference, you need to look that up online to find out what it is. Or you can listen to this podcast because I'm about to tell you what it does. So if you get the treasure ring of transference, know that it is a ring that can only be worn by a spellcaster, and once per game, the wearer of the ring can spend an action to transfer up to 5 points of their own health to another member of the warband that is in line of sight on a 1-to-1 basis. So if a wearer spent 3 health, they may transfer 3 health to another warband member. This may not take the other warband member above their starting health. There you go. Now you know what a ring of transference is. And you can look it up. Joe McCullough put it into a bunch of forums and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, anyways, if you want to look for stuff online as well, like copies of the wizard sheet to fill in all your warband on are downloadable. If you feel like having the separate copy of all the spells rather than having to flip through the book, those are all online too. So there's a bunch of resources online that are worth downloading. And
the Frostgrave Facebook group, Joe McCullough, the writer of the game, is on there, and he will sometimes respond, and it's pretty active. So there's enough people, like if you have any questions and stuff like that, you can go there as well, and it's a great resource for people who are getting into the game.
Yeah, it's a pretty straightforward game, so you don't have to feel the need to have a giant forum to go through to learn how to play the game.
Brandon really hates Facebook, so he's against it. All right. All right. Well, that is our podcast on the getting into Frostgrave. So if you have any further questions on Frostgrave, any questions that on it, or any questions for us in general, you can email us at contact@diceovereverything.com.
Or find us on Facebook, or Dice Over Everything.
This has been Alan.
Yeah, it's been Brandon.
Bye.